think it was asking for permission to share. I think that's been done. Are we visible?
Yeah.
All right. So let me jump right into it and talk about. I'll begin with talking about the ONDC's goals. A lot gets written about, what is the real reason for the government to have initiated this. But the only real reason is to dramatically step change e-commerce penetration. In fact, the idea of something like ONDC was conceived at the time of the first pandemic, when back in March 2020, the first wave was on the rise around the world, and nowhere was there any solution in sight, nowhere was any understanding about it in sight.
1 second, Shireesh.
Yeah.
Can you just press the record button, because there are many people who wanted to see the recording. Just press the record button.
I can't see the record
It's
button.
in the bottom. It's in the bottom. You see, participant share screen record. Just in the bottom. Just the bottom of the screen, if you can.
Just next to screen, share screen.
It's annotate. I see Q&A, annotate.
Yeah, just before Q&A, you see there is a record button.
I see chat. I don't have a record button. I have mute, start video, participants, chat, Q&A, new share, resume share, annotate, remote control, apps, and more.
Okay. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
But we do these briefings fairly frequently. So if anybody has missed today, let me know. And there's actually one tomorrow at 3 p.m. So if they can join that,
sure.
then they can benefit from that.
Okay.
What I'll also say as I go through this, that questions will occur. And so I'd encourage you to write down your questions immediately in the chat so you don't lose them. But I will take all the questions at the end, because some of them will get answered along the way. So just keep adding your questions to the chat box, and I'll take them up collectively at the end. Okay. All right. So as I was talking about the goal of ONDC, and at the time of the first pandemic, it was when the government, like all other governments around the world, concluded that the only way to contain the virus till we learn more about it was to have a lockdown and prevent people from moving around. The automatic corollary to that question was, then how will people access necessities and essentials? And it was out of that the need for something like ONDC was born, which is, can we create a method, a process, a system by which everybody who has anything to buy or sell can be connected to a single network, and digitally people can place orders and receive deliveries. That was the kind of broad thought. And as they worked through several models and several ways of getting at it, eventually it came to the design that is currently ONDC. So the goal for ONDC emanates from that thought, which is, how do we ensure that we can drive e-commerce penetration to population scale? And even after 2 years of pandemic, the truth is that a significant part of the retail sector is not digitally enabled. And the contribution of e-commerce to total retail in the country is still in single-digit percentages. End of 2020, it was a little under 4.5%. Now it's a little over 6%. And even that 6% comes largely from big urban centers. There is very limited participation from rural areas and smaller towns. So we are working towards enabling a population scale inclusion of merchants and buyers. We have 5-year goals in terms of nearly doubling the overall gross merchandise value in the country, more than 100-fold increase in the coverage of retailers, nearly tripling the number of Indians who are buying through e-commerce, and having at least 3/4 of the country very comprehensively represented on e-commerce. But we believe that if we get the network design right and the network effect kicks in, then we'll probably blow by these numbers much sooner, because the headroom of opportunity is much larger. So with that as the backdrop in terms of population scale inclusion and e-commerce as goal, let's examine what are the factors that are holding back that penetration, and in what way ONDC can solve for them. Now, today, everybody who considers joining e-commerce is basically doing it for access to scale. but the options for getting access to scale are very limited. There are just a handful of platforms that have some degree of scale, and so choices are very, very limited. Those choices come with fixed terms and conditions, and so retailers and merchants are unable to set their own terms and conditions. They simply have to follow whatever the platforms have driven. Now, whether it is as percentage commission, whether it is time of settlement, how many days after selling the item I get my money, or the fact that I may have to accept a return or a replacement, even though I send the correct product to the correct address and bear the additional cost. All those terms and conditions become burdensome for a large number of retailers. And that's another factor why many of them have chosen to stay outside e-commerce. Now, other than e-commerce platform, there are options available. People can create their own e-commerce website. You can create your own shop front on various tools like Shopify. But then discoverability is a issue, because then you have to spend a lot of money to attract buyers to buy from your shop front. And even after having spent that money and attracted them, they may not stay, because they're looking for a certain multi-brand experience, or a different kind of experience that you may not be expert in providing. So that becomes an expensive proposition, and building an entire e-commerce value chain is not possible even for large players, let alone small or medium players. So this large pool of retailers and MSMEs, etc., have one or more of these factors that are holding them from participating in e-commerce. So ONDC is looking to solve it by creating a network design that revolves around two interrelated principles. One principle is unbundling, where the customer and seller side efforts are bifurcated, and different entities will play those roles. And indeed, other entities will play other roles like logistics, etc. So you basically take apart the e-commerce solution and have different entities contribute different part. And like a jigsaw puzzle, all the pieces come together to complete the picture. So that's the first principle that of unbundling. This and the related principle is of interoperability. If these unbundled components have to work together and create a solution, then they need to be interoperable. And so these are the two principles around which ONDC has been designed. Now, is uh, interoperability is a is something that we experience every day, and we today see that in several walks of life. So let me just use e-commerce as an example, and email as an example. And in email, the sender and the receiver, they may be connected to the internet through two completely different internet service providers. They could be using two completely different email clients, but as long as both the clients are using the simple mail transfer protocol and connected to the common network, then a sender can send a mail that is received perfectly by the receiver. So SMTP is an example of an open protocol that frees the sender and the receiver from either being connected to the internet through the same provider or having to use the same email client, right? They're just both plugged into the network through an open protocol. ONDC has developed a similar protocol, which is the buyer can be connected to the network through any buyer application. The seller can be connected to the network through any seller application, and both will be connected to the network through ONDC protocols. And so the buyer and seller can have an e-commerce interaction regardless of which platform they're on, in much the same way an email is sent and received regardless of which platform the sender receiver on. This is the first of its kind anywhere in the world. And this is a made in India protocol specification created by Beacon Protocol. So they built the initial open protocol on which the ONDC layer has been built. And that's how we now are in a position to have an open network on e-commerce. The benefit of such an open network is that it enables any buyer to transact with any seller. Now, in today's platform world, that's not true. The buyers and sellers have to be present on the same platform. If they are not, then they cannot be a transaction. Whereas in the ONDC world, the buyers could be on one platform, the sellers could be on another platform, but as long as they're both connected to the network, all of them are visible to each other. And so a buyer on any platform is visible to a seller on any platform. Right? Both parties don't have to be on the same platform, registered on the same platform to see each other and have an e-commerce business conducted. So let's look at this open structure in some more detail. In this, as we understand it, if you see the two dotted rectangles, so all these activities today sit inside an e-commerce platform. This is what is now getting unbundled. So now in the open network, you have buyers, and buyers will be connected to applications which will be called buyer side applications. Now these buyer side applications could be a mobile app, it could be a desktop app, it could be a web page, it could be a messaging application, it could be an IVR, it could even be a voice activated device like Alexa. Right? And so it will be any piece of software that is able to accept the buyer's request and search the network for solutions to present back to the buyer to add to cart and buy. So buyer side application is like a concierge. Right? They're finding the answers and presenting back to the buyer to enable the buyer to buy those services. Likewise, on the other side, you have seller side applications that connect sellers to the network. So buyer side applications connect buyers to the network. Seller side applications connect sellers to the network. Now, these two applications will do different things. The buyer side application becomes an expert in understanding the buyer, expert in understanding search requests, expert in presenting search results, allowing filtering, adding to cart, confirming transaction. That's what the buyer side application will do. The seller side application will digitize the catalog and the inventory of sellers and make those visible to the network. So the way an e-commerce transaction will take place is that the buyer side application through the gateway will access ONDC registry, will identify which seller applications to broadcast to, and this will be by product category. So if the buyer is looking for a t-shirt, then the registry will help identify apparel catalogs. If the buyer is looking for a mobile charger, then the registry will help identify electronic sellers. If the buyer is looking for, let's say, a jar of 5 kilo cooking oil, then the registry will help find seller applications that have grocery catalogs. So in this fashion, the buyer side application will, through the registry, broadcast to seller side applications. The seller side applications then look at all the catalogs that are registered with them. Based on the search request that has come, they will look for matches in that catalog. We'll send back the matched entries back to the buyer side. The buyer side can then add to the cart, make the payment, and check out. Right. So that's how the e-commerce activity is now getting completed by buyers who are registered on buyer applications, sellers who are registered on seller applications, gateway that is allowing communication between the two and through the registry. And so that's how different entities are coming together to complete an e-commerce transaction. Now, such an open network facilitates not just an e-commerce transaction, but facilitates creation of efficient delivery of other kinds of services as well. And so open networks will interact with other open networks, and the government is building several open networks. So one such open network is the Open Credit Enablement Network. Now, a retailer who wants to upgrade from being a standalone store to being a supermarket obviously is thinking of additional investment in more size because he wants a larger space, cash registers, more aisles, better lighting, etc. So a lot of investment to be done to upgrade from a standalone store to a supermarket. And so all the retailer has to do is give permission to his seller side application to port his transaction history to the Open network. And the creditors on Open network can see his growth in customer base, growth in basket size, maybe he's in an economically prosperous zone, and machine to machine, a loan can be approved for him to upgrade. So in this fashion, open networks can interact with other open networks in an unbundled fashion. So in this unbundled fashion, the entire e-commerce network of ONDC does not need to interact with open credit network. Only the seller side application and the retailer are interacting, right? Because it's unbundled, so just the relevant portion can interact. So in this way, new additional, more efficient ways of creating or delivering services can take place. So with this as background, now let me show an example of how a transaction could take place on ONDC. I will walk through this transaction one way, and then I will talk about some variations that will give you an idea about how ONDC is not one model, but a flexible model that allows many kinds of models to be possible. So in this illustration, we have a buyer named Vijay, and Vijay is logging into his buyer or consumer application to buy atta. Now he can choose to enter just atta or 1 kilo atta or 1 kilo Annapurna atta, depending on how wide or narrow he wants his search to be. So let's say he enters atta to his consumer application. Now, his consumer application could be his messaging application like a WhatsApp. It could be his payment application like a Google Pay. It could be his telecom provider's application. So if he's an Airtel customer, his Airtel Thanks application could be his buyer application. Or he could be an Axis Bank consumer, in which case the Axis Bank application could be his consumer application. So the consumer application that buyers will use need not be the e-commerce applications of today. There could be any application that may already be on their phones today, as long as they have adopted the ONDC protocols. So let's say for illustration purposes that he's an Airtel customer and he's logged into Airtel Thanks app, and he's using that to do all his ONDC shopping. So in his Airtel Thanks app, he clicks on the ONDC widget and he enters ATA. Now the Airtel Thanks app through the gateway accesses the ONDC registry, and identifies all the seller applications that have Kirana catalogs with them and broadcasts the request to all those seller applications. The seller applications check against the catalogs that are registered with them. And when the network is live and well populated, thousands, maybe lakhs of entries may come back. In this illustration, we are showing 2 entries coming back. So let's say there's a standalone store, Gupta Kirana store, through one seller application that responds. And there is an aggregator called Big Basket who responds through another seller application. Now, Gupta Kirana store says that I can supply this atta for 50 rupees, but that does not include delivery. Big Basket says I can fulfill this atta for 150 rupees and delivery is included. So Vijay now gets presented with two options. Vijay looks at these two options, figures that he can probably buy atta for less than 100 rupees delivery cost. So he chooses not to take the inclusive of delivery 150 rupee price. He chooses Gupta Kirana store. Once he's chosen Gupta Kirana store, then the pickup location is also fixed. Airtel, in any case, through its KYC, knows where Vijay is located. So now Airtel Thanks app has the pickup location and delivery location. So the same Airtel Thanks app through the same gateway looks at the same multi-domain registry of ONDC. And now instead of looking for seller applications with grocery catalogs, is now looking for seller applications with logistics catalogs. And so now broadcast to a different set of seller applications that have logistics catalogs. These catalogs now check for logistics catalogs registered with them, look for who can provide delivery from Gupta Kirana store's location to Vijay's location, and presents back those options back to Vijay. So in his Airtel Thanks app, now he will see Dunzo offering a delivery for 50 rupees, Loadshare offering delivery for 70 rupees. Vijay selects Dunzo for delivery, and now Airtel Thanks app tells him that he can make the payment through UPI or on delivery, and he makes a UPI payment of 100 rupees, 50 for atta and 50 for delivery. So this is one manner in which an e-commerce transaction could be completed, with Vijay using his Airtel Thanks app as the buying application, a bunch of seller applications being partners, and a different delivery partner. Now, this same experience can go differently, right? So in this case, Vijay was selecting the seller and was also selecting the delivery partner. Now, here are some other variations that could take place. Let's say Gupta Kirana store is in the same pin code as Vijay, and Gupta Kirana store in his catalog has written that in my own pin code, I can also do delivery. So if he has written that in the catalog, so then at the second stage, when Vijay is looking for delivery options through his Airtel Thanks app, then Airtel Thanks app will search the network and three answers will come back. He will get 50 rupees by Dunzo, 70 rupees by Loadshare, and 0 rupees by Gupta Kirana store's own delivery boy, right? So an additional option will show up. So that's another variation that could take place. Or another variation could be that all the sellers are quoting price inclusive of delivery, in which case Vijay is making only one selection. He's only selecting the seller. He does not have to make the delivery solution. Now, the sellers who are chosen to quote the price inclusive of delivery, they can choose the delivery option in one of two ways. They can have a off-network agreement with some delivery partner through whom they do all their deliveries, or the seller could on ONDC look for a delivery partner at that very moment, identify and contract the delivery partner, and use them to deliver that atta. So in this fashion, the combination of entities can be multiple. And so it really depends on the selections made by Vijay, selections made by the seller application, the options presented, and what Vijay chooses to exercise. So in this fashion, because of the unbundled nature, the combination of entities that come together will vary depending on the participant selection. There is no one fixed model, there'll be multiple models. Now, in such a model, there are essentially three kinds of roles. There is the buyer application role, and in the example I gave, the Airtel Thanks application played the buyer application role. It was playing the role of a retail buyer. It helped Vijay find Gupta Kirana store as the store to buy, and it also played the role of a logistics buyer application. It enabled him to find and choose between Dunzo and Loadshare, right? So either the same application could be a multi-domain buyer application, or they could be specialist. So Vijay, in theory, could have used a specialist retail buying application for choosing his retail product, and a different application to buy logistics, right? So that would be an option that he can choose to exercise. Or as in this example, he could do both through the same application. Likewise, on the other side, seller applications could be specialists that either do only retail or only logistics, or there could be a more general seller application that onboards all sorts of goods and services, right? So there is buyer applications, seller applications, and gateways. These are really the three roles that network participants will play on ONDC. Now, the roles can be multiple. The same party can play multiple roles. So a seller, let's take Gupta Kirana Store. Right? So Gupta Kirana Store was a seller connected through a seller application selling to Vijay, who was coming through Airtel Thanks. Now, Gupta Kirana Stores is selling atta as a seller on the network, but Gupta Kirana Store could, for example, choose delivery himself instead of asking Vijay to choose. In which case, Gupta Kirana Stores is selling atta on the network and buying logistics on the network. Or Gupta Kirana Store could sell atta on network, could be buying atta through wholesale. Right? So same item being bought as a B2B wholesale purchase, being sold as a B2C to the retail. Or the seller could be, let's say, a stationery shop that sells art materials to an artist. The artist finishes the painting and sells it back to the same stationery shop to sell to another customer. So in this fashion, the buyer and seller roles can be perfectly reversed. So the same entity can be either buyer or a seller or both. All they need is to have the buyer and seller application, but one entity can play both roles. Now, when we started the network with having Kirana stores registered and hyper local delivery. So we had products that could be bought and a way for them to be delivered. As we started working with the participants who were bringing Kirana stores to the network, some of them also had restaurants. And so food delivery also became an automatic addition. So we had Kirana and food delivery as the two product categories, and hyper local service delivery as the third domain. So three domains were live. But over a period of time, we expect all sorts of domains and categories to come live. So tourism and hospitality, travel, mobility, wholesale, banking, agriculture, and many more. We are already in conversations with many to come on the network. What this will do is it will create experiences that are not possible today. So here is the hypothetical situation of, let's say, a person who's relocated from Delhi to Kerala for a 1 year assignment. Now, such a person could automatically have multiple needs coming out of such a short-term assignment. He may want suitcases to buy a flight ticket, buy a service, or book a service apartment for a year. And because they're going to Kerala, don't know the local language, let's say maybe they also want to learn the local language. Now, four needs coming out of a single event today will have four different ways of fulfillment. So for a suitcase, the person might have to go to a marketplace like Amazon. For flight ticket, the person may have to go to a travel portal or have to go to the website of an airline if he knows which airline flies. For service apartment, we'll have to go to an accommodation portal or a hotel app to book that service apartment. And for language lessons, he may have to do a Google search and find either email addresses or phone numbers to call or contact. So four different needs, four different platforms, four different journeys, four different checkouts. But once all the products and services are on ONDC, then it will be as easy as add suitcase to cart, add flight ticket Delhi Kochi to cart, add service apartment with check-in checkout date to cart, add a 10-lesson introductory Malayalam language course to cart, one checkout, and you're done. This is not possible today, right? So today I can't book a hotel room on Amazon, or today I can't buy suitcases on Make My Trip, or today I can't book flight tickets on hotel.com. Right? So each platform today specializes in certain set of products and services, but with ONDC, through a single application, a person will be able to access all domains and services. So as we look at benefits for buyers, sellers, and technology companies, and starting with buyers, that's the first benefit that example illustrates, which is through a single platform, a buyer can access all domains. Not only access all domains, but access all sellers in each domain and have a unified experience. So now, since I can do it through just one application, I need to maintain only one profile. I need to figure out, help or support from only one location. I can save my preference only in one location, my history across categories in one place, etc. So I can, have a single way of doing things. Whereas if I have to do through multiple applications, then I have to create multiple profiles. And let's say I change my home, then I have to change my address in all those profiles. Or let's say my last credit card expired and I want to add a new one, then I have to make those changes in every place. But on ONDC, I can do all that through a single application. So I can choose to maintain just a single profile and yet be able to buy pretty much everything that I want. Because of this structure, the buyers will also have wider options for price, delivery, add-ons, etc., including faster hyperlocal fulfillment. And in an open network, all sellers are visible to all buyers. So the only difference that a buyer application will have to win buyers to stay with them is to create better experiences, because having a larger number of sellers or having exclusive sellers or exclusive products is no longer possible, because all sellers are visible to all buyer applications. So the only differentiator will be a better buyer experience. And we will see a shift in applications now going towards experience to the parties that they have onboarded. So for buyer applications, that will be a focus on buyers. Today, platforms have dual loyalty, right? So because the platforms are onboarding buyers, they're also onboarding sellers. And so for a given transaction, sometimes there can be a conflict of interest. Do I have more loyalty to the buyer or more loyalty to the seller? Do I bump up the seller or do I give an impartial view to the buyers, right? So there is a conflict today inherent in a dual-sided platform. But in the ONDC world, there is no conflict because the buyer application have unidirectional loyalty to buyers only. So in similar fashion that buyers have many benefits, sellers will also have many benefits. First, a seller is now discoverable by the entire buyer universe. Right? Any buyer who's connected to ONDC can now discover the seller without exception. And they can do this by maintaining one-time single registration. So no longer, in order to access all the buyers on all the e-commerce platforms, do I need to maintain a registration on each of those platforms. Today, I connect to ONDC tomorrow through one seller application, through one registration, and all buyers on platforms can see me. That reduces my administrative costs and tasks substantially. So tomorrow, if I add 5 more products to my catalog, I make that change in one place. I delete 10 products from my catalog, I make that change in one place. I update my pricing list, I make that change in one place. I change my registered address, I make that change in one place. Right? I rebrand and I change my product nomenclature, I make that change in one place. So no matter what change I make, I have to make that change only in one place rather than make the same change in multiple places. Also, I am not doing all the parts myself, or I'm not getting all the parts of e-commerce built myself. As a seller, I'm only building my catalog and making that visible. So I'm not building a buyer user experience and spending money on making that better. I'm not spending money on contracting a delivery service for myself. Right? I'm just tapping into public delivery utilities that are operating at scale and just simply choosing one that can do the best job at the best cost. So in this fashion, I'm partnering with multiple entities, each of whom is the best at their job, is the most efficient at their job, and therefore my price realization, so from the money that the buyer is paying, if I am partnering with cost efficient components, then the realization I have from that pricing into my account improves substantially. Then I also have the ability to work on my rules and terms, right? So I no longer have to follow standard rules and terms. So as a buyer, I can choose what terms and conditions I want to work with. So let's go back to the Vijay and Gupta Kirana store example, right? So Gupta Kirana store could determine that they get a decent amount of foot traffic in their store, so they don't want to have thousands of orders on e-commerce that are unprofitable. So Gupta Kirana store can say, look, I don't want to deal with orders from outside the city. I will accept orders only from within my own city, and within those I will accept returns only from my own pin code, because if a customer wants to return or exchange, then I can send my own boy on a bicycle and swap that product. I don't have to pay third party any delivery costs, right? So in this fashion, Gupta Kirana stores can declare on what terms and conditions he wants to operate. The benefit of this is that he will only get those e-commerce orders which are profitable for him. So he no longer is getting several orders, most of whom may be unprofitable. He will get maybe a smaller list of orders, but all those orders will be profitable because he has chosen the terms and conditions that work for him. So all these conditions, all these facets, which is access to a larger buyer universe, lower administrative costs of single registration, greater realization because you're partnering with cost-efficient partners, autonomy and rules and conditions, all of these lead to increased profitability. In addition to these benefits, there'll be more benefits that will be available on the network, which is seller applications now have loyalty only to sellers, right? Seller applications don't have buyers registered within. Their work on making sellers visible to the network, and their loyalty is to sellers, and the only way they grow their own business is to help the sellers grow their own business. So seller applications as a value addition will provide business enhancement analytics. So for example, the seller application on which Gupta Kirana store is registered could tell Gupta Kirana store saying, hey, Mr. Gupta, here are the top 100 searched Kirana items. You have 90 of these items. You don't have 10 of these 100. Why don't you stock them? You will start getting more orders. Uh, just give me a second. I have an emergency call. I'll just be back in a minute. sorry, I'm back. Right. So they can, for example, give guidance as to how a catalog can be enhanced, or they could, let's say, the seller application on which Dunzo is registered could look at which are all the locations where Dunzo is getting good traffic and locations where they're not getting good traffic, and maybe it has to do with pricing on those legs, right? And so they could advise them that okay, following are the routes on which if you adjust your pricing, then you might get orders even for those routes as well. So in this fashion, seller applications will provide value addition in terms of business enhancement analytics. Another feature that ONDC will make possible is a portable network-wide reputation. Reputation is a very, very important currency that allows scale to be possible on e-commerce, because it is because of reputation that buyers are willing to buy from sellers that they did not know of at all before they began this journey. Even on well-known, familiar, trusted platforms, and the buyer could be registered on any of the large e-commerce platforms today. But when searching for a product, if they hit a seller who has, let's say, only a 2 on 5 rating, or a product that has a 2 on 5 rating, they will choose not to buy. So reputation matters a lot in terms of getting people to buy products and from sellers that they don't know of. Now, this reputation is not built by the platforms. The reputation is built by the seller, or reputation is built by the manufacturer of the product. But today in the platform universe, this reputation is not available to the people who built it as their own asset. It's locked inside a platform. So if I'm a seller, let's say I'm a seller who's selling on ShopClues, and tomorrow I want to now start selling on Mintra, then all the reputation that I have built on ShopClues is not available if I go to Mintra. Right? I have to start afresh. And so a buyer on Mintra, when they search, and even if my catalog entry shows, they will say, "Oh, this seller has 0 transactions, no reputation data available. Let me not buy." So the seller has built a reputation, but the reputation has got locked inside a platform and is not available to leverage as an asset. On ONDC, the reputation is at a network level. It is not inside a seller app. It is a network level reputation that the seller has. So if the seller, for whatever reason, gets a better offer, gets a seller application that is providing better value added services and wants to change, they can simply move to the new seller application, and their entire reputation that they've built on the network is still visible. So let's say a seller has done 20,000 transactions, has a reputation of 4.5 on 5. If they change the seller app through which they are connected, the next buyer who searches for a product and their catalog entry shows up will also see 20,000 transactions and a 4.5 on 5 rating. So now the reputation belongs to the party that created it, whose asset it is, and who will benefit from it. It is not locked inside a platform. This reputation will work at multiple levels. It will be the entity as well as the sub provider within the entity. So a salon will have a reputation, a stylist will also have a reputation, educational institute will have a reputation, a teacher will also have a reputation, a delivery company will have a reputation, a delivery agent will also have a reputation. So if a delivery agent leaves one delivery company, joins another delivery company, he or she will carry their reputation with them. If a teacher leaves one college, joins another college, they will carry their reputation with them. Or if a college leaves one seller application, joins another seller application, then the college retains its reputation. So in this fashion, the reputation belongs to the creators and it is network wide. That's a new benefit that will be possible on ONDC that currently is not available on platforms. And lastly, there is no disintermediation risk. So sellers today worry that once they join any e-commerce platform, the e-commerce platform looks at thousands of sellers like them, looks at all that data, identifies the best-selling products, uses their scale to source the products themselves and create their own store brand or create their own supply chain. And eventually, the sellers either get knocked off completely or get reduced to being suppliers with a very low margin. Right? So that disintermediation risk goes away because on ONDC, there is no central entity that is doing all the business components and no central entity that has all the data. So in this fashion, sellers have lots of benefits to also gain. Technology companies likewise stand to gain by they don't have to build an entire e-commerce platform to be part of e-commerce. They can just build a component and still be able to benefit. So one example, let me illustrate this with the example of, let's say, an image processing company. So this could be a company that is an expert in creating image processing solutions. One solution, for example, could be for, let's say, the healthcare industry. They could be doing automatic scanning of X-rays and providing an interpretation for the radiologist or the doctor to provide a final answer. Or another example could be image processing for security software. So doing fingerprint or retina scans to allow people to enter a building or a premises, right? So these are the kind of examples that this image processing company could be doing. Now on ONDC, such a company can also become part of e-commerce by, let's say, creating a image processing catalog solution. So think about a really low technology vendor like a hand cart vegetable vendor, right? Somebody who has piled up vegetables on his hand cart, pushes that hand cart street after street and sells to people on the street, or people from neighboring houses and buildings that call out to him. Now, all this person has to do is aim this image processing software that is downloaded on his phone, aim his camera at his hand cart. The image processing software can scan that image, can identify potato, brinjal, cauliflower, etc. Not only identify them, but list them in 27 Indian languages. And all the vendor has to do is just simply put the rate 40 rupees a kilo, 60 rupees a kilo. And suddenly the image processing company has created a digital catalog tool doing only what they do today, which is image processing, right? They've done nothing extra. They've just taken their existing strength, but allowed a hand cart vendor to be able to create his catalog. Now, in terms of commercial terms, the software company could say that my software is free for download. I will just simply take a 0.1% of every transaction. So the vegetable vendor and many vegetable vendors can just simply download it for free. And whenever they have a transaction, they just have to part with a transaction. And so if they get a 100 rupee order, I'm sure they will not mind parting 10 paise to this software company. So suddenly, this software company doing what they do well, which is image processing, has built a component for e-commerce that can be leveraged at scale, and they've created an e-commerce revenue stream. So this is how this unbundled interoperable universe of ONDC can help buyers, sellers, and technology companies at scale. Now, a bit of word about what ONDC is not. And in fact, as I read a lot of articles that get published about us, many of them refer to ONDC as an app or as a super app or as an aggregator. We are none of those. We are not an app. We are not a super app. We are not an aggregator. We are simply an open network. We are a protocol. We are connecting various entities onto that network, but we ourselves are not a front end. So buyers will not buy through an ONDC named application. Sellers will not put their catalogs on ONDC application. ONDC is a network that is onboarding seller and buyer applications on which these buyers or sellers will be registered. There is no single central intermediary that is doing all the e-commerce platform activities. In fact, ONDC eliminates the need for such a central intermediary. ONDC will not digitize businesses, but ONDC will enable e-commerce expansion by connecting digitized businesses. ONDC, because of its unbundled interoperable nature, will enable broad-based innovation. So many new kinds of models will come into being. Many different kinds of entities will become part of e-commerce. I gave in my Vijay Buying Atta example of how Airtel Thanks app could become a part of e-commerce. So today, banks are looking to become part of e-commerce. Telecom operators are looking to become part of e-commerce. Social media companies are looking to become part of e-commerce, all because of the unbundled nature. So now they don't have to put together an entire e-commerce platform and compete platform to platform with the biggies, which will be very challenging. But they can leverage their strength of a large buyer universe or a large seller universe, become part of e-commerce, contribute to a different kind of model, and thus be able to drive innovation and penetration through ONDC. So that's the kind of a fundamental premise of ONDC. And ONDC doesn't work like a regulator. We work as a market and community-led initiative. We are right now a team of under 40, and at the best, we don't expect to be more than 70, 80 strong team. And for a 70, 80 strong team to create solutions for more than 1 billion Indians across all products and services, B2C and B2B, is only possible if we tap into all the ecosystems and leverage the benefit of those ecosystems to build ONDC. So everything we've done, the ONDC technology design, ONDC policies, all of them have been shared with participants such as yourselves. And we take their feedback on board before we finalize either the ONDC technological design or our policies. The project was created as at the initiation of the Commerce Ministry, and Shireesh Goyal is looking at ONDC as a way to democratize e-commerce by moving from a platform-centric to an open network model. And when we think democratization, we are thinking not just stores like Kirana stores, which are still a brick and mortar store, but the corner panwala or the thela wala sabji wala, like the hand cart vendor that I mentioned, or somebody who spreads a sheet on the side of the road and sells pottery that they make at home. So democratize e-commerce to such an extent that even they can transact and sell on e-commerce. And certainly the expectation is that coming in the wake of digital infrastructure at population scale, like we have the biometric identity at population scale through Aadhaar, we have the vaccination tracking at population scale through CoWIN. We have digital payments at population scale through UPI. Similarly, we will have e-commerce at population scale through ONDC and establish India as an e-commerce leader on the global stage. The project started with the creation of an advisory council comprising of stalwarts from multiple domains. Many of these names would be familiar. So they have expertise in technology, in government programs, in finance, in retail, etc. And this advisory council was formed middle of last year. We had the initial rollout plan endorsed by Shireesh Joshi in August. We started conversing with initial set of companies in October. By December, we had completed the integration and round trip testing between different entities playing different participant roles. So seller app, buyer app, logistics apps, all coming together to create a transaction. December, ONDC was registered as a non-profit Section 8 company. So ONDC is a private sector company, although created at the behest of the government, but it's a private sector company as a non-profit organization. From January onwards, we started various technical programs. And by March, the network was live with this first cohort transactions. April, the test transactions began. And since then, we've now been working to expand. By end of June, we were in multiple domains. So we now have apparel live. We have home and decor also live, in addition to food and beverage and grocery and hyper local logistics. We have now 21 cities that have gone live. And every passing few days, we add additional cities and additional domains. And we are gearing up for a grand launch before end of August. The company is headed by Mr. Koshi. Mr. Koshi, some of you may know, was the head of NSDL, who brought in the digital version of the dematerialized stocks to the country for the first time. He was part of the GST program. He was part of the Aadhaar AUI DI project as well. And he brings a vast experience of digital infrastructure population scale. And then we have individuals. I had network expansion. We have Vibhor Jain, Supriyo Ghosh, and Rahul Handa heading network governance, enablement, and strategic initiatives that will help strengthen ONDC. As a private sector company, our shareholders are stock exchanges, other Section 8 companies, private and public sector banks. And we've gone live in the initial cities with Paytm as the buyer application, LoadShare as the logistics service provider, and Digit, Growth Falcons, GoFrugal, eSamuday, and Seller App as the retail seller side applications. Nearshop and eSamuday and Dunzo are nearly complete with their testing. So very soon we'll have a larger list of companies that will go live. We are speaking to now more than 150 companies, many of whom are now in advanced stages of integration. And so over the next few weeks, we should see the network grow rapidly. Many of you may have seen the announcement by Snapdeal that Snapdeal will, before end of August, come live with 2,500 cities. So that will be another boost to the network. So that's it from a presentation standpoint. Let me now go to the chat and take your questions, and then we will come to the answer. Yes, Vinayak, we'll be sharing the deck. Ajay Gupta's question: how will various small stores and sellers be digitized? So they'll be through the seller application. I showed in the slide there are several seller applications that are taking place. So Seller App, GoFrugal, eSamuday, Growth Falcons, Digit, all these companies are getting in touch with sellers or manufacturers or SMEs who have things to sell. And they are converting and digitizing their catalogs and onboarding on their application so that whenever there is a buyer, they're able to discover these. Rajneesh Kapoor's question: the end-to-end transactions ride on customer experience beyond the transactional buy-sell delivery will need support, especially in tricky situations. With some current bundle players, their customer centricity has helped adoption. E-commerce has thrived under these conditions. Under ONDC, who will give this support? Now, first of all, remember that even in the current platform, there are at least two entities involved, sometimes three. The two entities involved are the platform and the seller. These are two different legal entities. Marketplaces, for example, by law can't be sellers themselves, right? So there's a different party who's a seller. Now the customer today interacts with the platform. If there is an issue where they need support, there is an issue with the platform, and depending on what the issue is, either the platform will resolve it themselves or will then forward that to the seller to resolve it. So let's say the product needs replacement. In that case, the platform will send that message to the seller, and the seller has to then take that on. Now, the seller in their conditions would have declared what the return conditions are. Either it's returns are possible or not possible. If they're possible, Will the delivery company initiate it as soon as they pick it up, or does the customer have to send a photograph to the seller and the seller looking at the photo okays it, right? So whatever those conditions are, based on that, the alternative action will be accepted. Sometimes it can be the delivery company, but there's a third party involved. Then the delivery company has to bear the brunt. And the platform being a consumer facing application sometimes will step in, right? And so even though the seller may legally be not at fault, but the buyer wants to retain buyer application, or the platform wants to retain the buyer as a good customer, the buyer application may choose to create that refund, right? So those are all the practices possible today. On ONDC, the same thing will happen. In this case, the buyer application will do the activities we are familiar with from platform. The buyer application will resolve some issues themselves. Some issues that the seller has to resolve will be forwarded to the seller for the seller to resolve. And sometimes when the seller has chosen not to respond for whatever reason, the buyer application may choose to intervene to make the buyer happy. So all the practices that are possible today will continue to be available even on ONDC. In addition, buyer applications and seller applications will have access to an online dispute resolution mechanism that we are building. In a couple of months' time, we should expect that to be ready. And so once that is available, then should there be an issue that buyer and seller applications can't resolve directly, then it can be escalated to the online dispute resolution mechanism. And there'll be multiple providers of this. So they can choose who they want to go with. It will be a legally backed arbitration mechanism that will allow access to network data to be able to identify who needs to bear the brunt in this particular case and provide that verdict. So in this fashion, all possible ways in which today customer redress will take place are possible. In addition, there will be ODR. Ajay's question, additionally, how will quality service returns? Okay, I've answered that. Vinay Kumar's question, how will Vijay's e-com feed be decided? Generally, consumers buy multiple items. Do you think multiple sellers to one buyer scenario may become more common? So today, that's true. Even today, when we search on e-commerce, we get presented with multiple products and multiple sellers of those multiple products, right? So that's the experience even today. Regardless of whether I'm looking to buy a carton of juice or a carton of milk, or I'm buying a flight ticket, I am presented with multiple options. Now, what the platforms do is they provide filter criteria, right? So for flights, I may have to choose non-stop, or I may choose a particular airline, and I might choose morning departures. Similarly, on consumer platform, I might choose rating, or I might choose delivery speed, or I might choose price. So good applications provide filters to enable buyers to navigate a large list of options and to be able to thereby be able to help the buyer narrow down their choices and select. So similarly, on ONDC also, buyer applications will provide those filters and those choices. Over a period of time, as I said, buyer applications have to improve buyer experience. So personalization and relevance will be capabilities that buyer applications will have to build and determine. So if Vijay is the one buying, then what does Vijay typically tend to buy? And therefore help Vijay get to his answer faster. Vinay Kumar's question, next one is, will there be advertising opportunity for sellers to get a premium placement? Yes, there will be opportunities. So just the way it is on platforms today, it will be on buyer applications. And so buyer applications will make sponsored slots available. And in fact, they could make those sponsored slots available on ONDC, right? So it need not be an off ONDC conversation. It could even be on ONDC. So a buyer application could determine that at the top of the app, they've got 3 sponsored slots, and they could sell those 3 sponsored slots on ONDC, and an advertiser could on ONDC buy one or more of those slots and upload their creative and be able to go live. So yes, there will be advertising opportunities possible, but they will be inside the buyer application. So ONDC will not be party or participant in that conversation. Next question, also from Vinay Kumar. One of the challenges for sellers on closed platforms is quality of catalog and listing optimization. This is essential to ensure that the merchant product is listed against the most relevant queries. Will there be agencies to help small kirana stores with this? Yes. So the seller applications that are still on the screen right now are doing exactly this job. And because they've onboarded some kirana stores, and most of kirana store catalogs tend to be like another kirana store, so they have the capability to be able to help kirana stores with this. That is already true even today. E-commerce is not new. It's more than a decade old. And certainly in packaging commodities categories, there is already information on the pack that can get converted to the catalog entry. So name of product, generic name of product, size, MRP, etc. A lot of that information is already available. On top of that, ONDC is going to create one capability and facilitate creation of another capability that will also help this. So we are creating our own taxonomy. And I briefly flash the organization. So on the far right, you will see Rahul Handa heading strategic projects. One of the projects that he heads is taxonomy. So in every product category, we will be building the generic taxonomy. And we are also encouraging players in that ecosystem to build their master catalog. So let's take a carton of milk. The taxonomy will state that overall there is grocery, sub-level dairy, sub-level milk, right? Fresh milk or liquid milk. So that will be the taxonomy. And then Nestle could build a catalog entry that says, I have A plus, vitamin enhanced milk, 1 liter for 150 rupees. So in this fashion, there is an existing capability that seller applications have, and they're onboarding merchants. On top of that, ONDC will create a taxonomy and will encourage OEMs and manufacturers to build master catalogs that are available as a resource. Ajay Gupta's question, how will ONDC be self-sustainable and what will be its revenue model? ONDC has got an infusion of funds. And in fact, we have not chosen to draw on all the funds that we've been committed. We've sort of taken about roughly 2/3 of the committed funds. That is enough based on our current forecast to see us through for at least 2 to 3 years. On an ongoing basis in the future, we expect to charge for some services at a very, very basic non-profit cover our cost levels. And at that scale, it will be really a small percentage for participants. So it'll almost be invisible or near invisible. So that will be the sustainable revenue model. Next question from gpk24@yahoo.co.in. Is focus on tier 2, tier 3 towns going by a pilot cities? Our focus is national GPK, and we have different applications who have different focus. We have, for example, the CSC stores, which is also a government-backed enterprise. They are bringing village-level entrepreneurs and Grameen stores on. We are in touch with and working with government programs like ENAM and GEM. So their sellers could potentially also onboard with us. Plus, we are working with several seller applications and retail associations, and they're also helping sellers come on board. So yes, we are looking at tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5, rural, everything. And different seller applications will specialize in different tiers of cities and different categories of sellers. Rishabh Mehta's question, how do we integrate with ONDC protocol and become a part of either buyer, seller, or technology side? So you write to team@ondc.org. We're getting a lot of mail, so bear with us if it takes a couple of days to get back. But we will connect you. So let us know what do you want to be. You want to be a buyer application or seller application or technology service provider, or want to provide gateway services. And then we will connect you with the respective person inside ONDC and add you to whatever program, whether a Slack channel or Discord channel or a community call that we do weekly, whatever be the appropriate way for you to be taken forward. Ajay Gupta's question, what will be buyer applications leverage on seller application to drive customer experience and service? So first of all, there is a legal contract. Buyer application and seller applications, in order to be added to the registry that we maintain, will have to sign a legal contract. That legal contract requires them to agree to abide by all the ONDC rules, plus abide by all the laws of the country. So abide by Consumer Protection Act, etc., etc. They will have to follow all the laws of the land. So the participation is bound by a legally enforceable contract. Every transaction will end up with a non-repudiable, digitally signed catalog entry that's available both at the buyer side and the seller side. And in the event of dispute, this information will now come into play to address that dispute. And I mentioned in an answer to the earlier question on what that mechanism will be. The buyer applications and the buyer themselves will have the opportunity to input on the rating and reputation. So that's one recourse. Second is buyer applications can choose, and the protocol provides for it, to retain part of the payment till the return window closes, right? So for example, if it's a 100 rupee item, The buyer application could say that I'll pay 90 rupees now, and 10 rupees I will pay after a week after the returns window is closed, like that. And so the buyer application could be retaining 10% of all transactions that they're fulfilling, and they will have a pool of money available to be able to refund to the buyer without waiting for the seller to come into play. And then they can put the back-to-back request on the seller subsequently. So there will be network level consequences, financial or reputation. There'll be network level services that they can tap into, like the ODR resolution, and there will be legal recourses. All those will be available for buyer applications to have seller applications respond well. And seller applications also know that the reputation is now network wide. If they build a bad reputation, then they will actually not get good business. And seller applications will be held responsible for the kinds of sellers they bring on board. So the transparency on reputation and all these mechanisms will help determine the best behavior. Mukul Jain's question, how are commissions determined across the value chain? Longer term and broadly speaking, we want market forces to determine the commissions. ONDC does not want to guide this conversation. However, at the initial stages, only for the Kirana domain, we have had the conversation with the initial participants and asked them to create to work with 3% as the category commission for grocery only. For all other conversations, we will have market forces determine what that commission needs to be. How will payment be stored with the buyer application until time the goods are delivered? So I partially answered that. That's a choice that the buyer and seller applications will have to negotiate and agree at the time they're agreeing to the transaction on one, who will collect the money from the buyer? Is it the buyer application, the seller application? And what will be the terms of settlement? Is the entire money settled at the outset? Is the entire money settled after delivery? Is part of the money settled at the time the shipment is initiated, rest after delivery? Or is the rest settled after the returns window closes? So that will be the machine-to-machine negotiation between buyer and seller application. Will ONDC mandate a somewhat standardized user interface so that buyers get to experience and get used to searching, filtering, and transacting? Absolutely not. This is how buyer applications, by the way, will have and should have more expertise in that. ONDC will not build that expertise. So buyer applications should do that expertise, build improved and better experiences for searching, filtering, transacting, presenting, and basically helping buyers get a buyer experience. So ONDC will not guide that. We expect others to be much better and experts in that. Anupam's question had dropped off a bit, so may have just missed this, but are we talking about services such as cab, home services? Yes, absolutely, Anupam. We're talking about all those services, home bakers, tutors, anybody who has anything to sell and is catalogable can become a seller on the network. So yes, all sorts of possible services. And in fact, taxi services are already live on ONDC. The Beacon Protocol had initiated a project in Kochi City with cab services being available and multiple taxi associations registering their taxis on the network. And now that idea is being taken broader. So that's actually not theory, that's actually in practice in market. And Ajay's last question. So each buyer or seller application will have an agreement with each other. This will create a semi-closed network within ONDC. No, it doesn't create a semi-closed network. In fact, it creates an open network. So each buyer and seller has an agreement with ONDC. And whenever they have a transaction, their respective connections with ONDC effectively become a complete transaction with each other. So that's how it will take place. All buyer applications can interact with all seller applications. It will not be a closed network. It will be an open network. Mukul Jain's question, over time, won't the buyer apps and seller apps merge into some kind of super app doing both? We do not know. And I do not think necessarily that will happen because the capabilities required to run an efficient and highly capable buyer application or a highly capable seller application are expertise in their own right? So that's like saying that car manufacturers now can start manufacturing tires themselves because they have the scale, right? So Toyota as a big car manufacturer should make its own tires, but they don't. So over a period of time, actually work starts going to specialist organizations who do that activity very well, rather than everybody trying to do everything. That's actually the broader general experience. And finally, Anupam Mittal's question, what happens to the large value created in companies such as Flipkart, Uber, etc.? The economics turn on its head, right? In some ways, yes, they do. Right now, value is getting locked inside those platforms. Scale is available only to those limited platforms. Now, ONDC will help democratize and make that scale available to everyone. And so, yes, the economics should change. More players will become participants, and that additional competition should make overall e-commerce much more efficient. And some of the complaints of extraordinary value being taken up by platforms should start to go down. So yes, we do expect that the economics will change. So with that, we come to the end of questions. I hope this was beneficial, and I do hope all of you or all of your client organizations or your investee organizations can get started on working to come on board with ONDC. I see your hand raised, so
Shireesh, thank you so much. It was a brilliant session. I think it's really looks revolutionary, and I'm sure that this will be another totally new dimension from the Make in India type of thing. Gauri, would you like to add any parting words?
Sure. So I think, what type of queries are we receiving, right? And maybe Mrs. Joshi, you can sort of also, sort of get it, give your perspective on that, right? So the queries that we are receiving now on this entire thing is when from tech companies perspective, right? If they were to sort of create, assist, uh, I'm going one level behind, right? One is what we explained is seller apps and the buyer apps. But there will be tech companies that will come on board, which will help create buyer apps and the seller apps as well, right? With specialization. So all these different stakeholders, have sort of started asking questions. And one thing I want to just point out here is, I think on the data part, Mr. Joshi, if I'm right, because with the data protection law coming in and the consumer data, how is it being collected, how it is being shared, etc., that is something also will be within the controls of the buyer app and the seller app with the relevant compliances that they will need to put in place. So that is one query, and what I've understood from our prior conversations with the ONDC team is that it is not, the data will not be with ONDC as a company, right? It will be with the respective buyer and the seller app, but that is one query which is coming up, especially in the context of the the data sharing discussions that is ongoing, which is a non-personal data sharing that is ongoing in in another quarters of the government. How does that all come together, is one aspect we have to deal with. And the second aspect which you alluded to is, there are plethora of laws in India which are, under the Consumer Protection Act and the Legal Metrology Act, several declarations required. So I would categorize the products into two categories. One is the packaged commodities, where, as you rightly said, that the declarations required are quite known, and they are quite easy to plug in, because if I'm selling a Amul butter from shop 1 or shop 2, it doesn't matter, the declarations remain the same, right? From the legal compliance perspective. But when it comes to the the no, not with the products which are customized or not packaged commodities, that is where the seller apps will have to work more creatively in ensuring compliance, especially for the for the products where which are coming, I think the earlier examples in the earlier things we have looked into, for such as handicraft products and that and the other, right? So what are the declarations, legal declarations required, and seller apps being cognizant of those and ensuring that those declarations are made when the sellers are being onboarded. Because what I've understood with the prior conversation is that if there are legally compliant declarations are not made, then those products may not get filtered appropriately, in the sense that those may not be even maybe depicted in my search result, right? So I think some of these legal nuances are coming up from from some people. So as we go along, I think these things will develop, apart from I think the issue about dispute resolution, right? You have already explained, but how does the dispute resolution mechanism under the Consumer Protection Act fit in? Whether people should try to resolve in through your mechanism, or should they be going to the Central Consumer Protection Authority for dispute resolution if there is a particular seller app constantly behaving in a particular manner, and then the CCPA comes in, rather than parties having to file individual complaints with the consumer protection authorities, right? So in the broad legal framework, I can see that there are already tools available where which will give a solution to some of the questions on the disputes, etc., that were raised. I feel there are solutions possible which are more effective in the new legal setup under the Consumer Protection Act, which came into play in 2019, which is done more at an institutional level rather than each buyer having to deal with each seller. So I thought I'll just bring that out as well, because it may be a systemic issue which can be solved more at a institutional level, rather than for example, certain app constantly not making proper declarations, certain app constantly defaulting on deliveries, etc., right? So that can be handled at a CCPA level rather than even at individual level. So I thought I'll just share this couple of thoughts, but would love to hear from Mr. Joshi on the 2-3 points that I have made.
Okay, so you raised three questions. You raised the question on data privacy. You raised the question on compliance with legal laws, and at the end you talked about disputes. So let me cover each of the three. So now, as regards the disputes, look, imagine a buyer has a 100 rupee dress or 150 rupee dress that they want to raise an issue about. It does not make sense for them to go to consumer court and have a protracted negotiation. Whereas if there is an online dispute resolution mechanism available, then digitally an arbitration can take place. The arbitrator can look at the buyer and seller actions taken during the transaction and determine based on what is done. So let's say the seller had at the time of transaction getting created had said that returns are acceptable within 10 days. Now by the time the buyer has bought and the product has been delivered, the seller has changed the terms and conditions and say that now I've stopped accepting returns. So when the buyer raises a complaint, the seller says, look, my terms and conditions are that I don't accept returns. Now, the arbitrator can look at the digital signature of the transaction at the time it was created, note that at that time the terms and conditions were of acceptance, and say that no seller has to accept it and declare that. So in this fashion, there will be an additional capability available, which will hopefully help resolve many of the disputes efficiently and cost efficiently and time efficiently. And the law of the land is still available. So if after all that, somebody still wants to go to court, they can. But what we've done is we've created an ability to resolve many of these in a faster, efficient fashion. So that's one. Second, you talk about sellers having to obey the law of the land. So yes, when they sign the network participant agreement, they have to declare all those, right? Now, there are many laws of land. You have to file your taxes, etc. Everything does not need to be declared to us, right? So a retailer today in a store could be selling items above MRP. So the compliance to the law is enforced by different arms and different entities of the government. ONDC's job is not to enforce. Right? ONDC will require them to declare that they will obey the laws of the land, but it isn't ONDC's job to make all of those part of our governance mechanisms. Right? And so different entities will have to bring that to bear. Seller applications will also have a responsibility to screen and ensure that those are being followed. And that will be the party. Now you spoke of data privacy. So yes, you're right that all the data is not being kept by anybody. Nobody has all the data. The buyer applications will retain buyer information. Seller applications will retain seller information. At the time a transaction is confirmed, then at that time the buyer information travels to the seller side because an invoice has to be created and delivery has to be done. Till that time, no buyer information travels to the seller side. ONDC will only keep a record of the fact that a transaction took place, will not keep record of who the buyer was or what the item was bought, or which seller used which delivery company to send it. All those detailed information will not be maintained by ONDC. So by following a principle of compartmentalizing the data is how we'll ensure that there are no risks to data privacy in the first place. And then we, as well as the network participants, as being corporate citizens of the country, have to obey the laws of the country. So we will also comply with whatever data privacy laws get published from time to time.
this time with us. I think our portfolio companies, maybe 150 or 200 of them, I think they will really benefit a lot from, whatever you have shared. So we will share the recording and probably also arrange an interaction with your team for all these startups so that they can prepare themselves to join this, great initiative that you guys have taken. I'd like to thank you on behalf of Indian Angel Network and all the participants.
Hari, my request would be that I will share the link to tomorrow's briefing call with you, and I would rather that you invite the startups to come and join the briefing calls directly, because much of the understanding is actually in the questions people ask, and everybody asks questions from their perspective based on who they want to be. And so the questions that your team has asked today may be different from the questions somebody else has in their mind. And we invest that time every week at the very least. So if you can gather your investee companies together, I'm happy to do a bespoke call for your network exclusively. Or at the very least, you can invite people to join. You can share the recording, but my experience is the recording really doesn't help. People need to ask the questions that occur in their own mind for them to understand what this is. It'll help them understand some parts of it, but the true understanding comes from asking your own questions, because then based on the recording, they will come and say, yes, we've understood, we want to join the network. And then as they start interacting with us, we realize that they have basic questions. We effectively end up going through the briefing anyway. So that would be my suggestion, that share the link. And if you think that it makes sense to do a bespoke one, even if it's not 150 at a time, even if it is 20, 30 starters at a time, we're happy to do multiple briefing calls for your network.
Thank you, Shireesh. Thank you. Thank you very much. I once again think this is amazing, and it's a real revolution in the making.
Sure.
Thank you, Gauri.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.